welcome to the Album Man, and finally we're going to be continuing the Beatles discography, and of course that brings us to the White Album. In 1968 the Beatles of course released their famous double album colloquially known as the White Album, but I'm sure pretty much all of you already knew that. Now, due to this album's length, since it has a lot of songs on it, we're going to split this review into two parts. This is going to cover, well, the first CD of the LP, or the first, I suppose, vinyl. And this is definitely all in all one of the most famous double albums in rock history, but I would also say one of the most controversial. Many hail it as one of the greatest albums of all time, while many others do also see it as a bit of a sort of sporadic mess, I suppose. It's certainly an album which I've definitely changed my mind about over the last year, since I've really been listening to this album a lot more. When I was younger, it's certainly not one of the Beatles albums I listen to personally the most. But this is certainly also one of the most important in their history, not just due to the monolithic scope and ambition, but historically to the breakup of the Beatles, since this was the album where tensions flared. Ringo Starr left the band for 2 weeks and the rivalry between John and Paul became bitter. The recording approach became increasingly individualistic, with only 16 of the 30 tracks actually featuring all four members, and many of the songs are pretty much just performed by the person that wrote it. To me, this is the soundtrack to the Beatles' breakup. Yes, Abbey Road came afterwards, and of course Let It Be. But across the expanse of these songs, buried in the lyrics and in the individuality in so many of the songs, you really see that the group vibe of the Beatles is beginning to fall apart. That with this album, you really begin to see the breakdown of one of the world's greatest artists, and it showcases certainly the sheer musical genius and brilliance from the boys from Liverpool, but also it showcases the worst, the self-indulgent compositions simply to vent individual ego. So let's really dig into the heart of the White Album. The opening track of an album seriously needs to grab you, and needs to set the tone for the rest of the record, and few openers in rock music have the same gravitas in this department as Back in the USSR. The song, written in a tongue-in-cheek way as a parody of Chuck Berry's Back in the USA. Utilising screaming guitar parts as McCartney captures his inner rock and roller. And this album, of course, is the Beatles at the most experimental, so as well as the traditional Chuck Berry inspired rock and roll vibe, we also have some Beach Boys, sort of California girls like vocal harmonies going on in the verse. And sure, Ringo may have been absent from the recording of this iconic song, but Paul, John and George all pitch in on the drum parts and certainly do a good enough job. And I hate to say that his absence isn't missed too much from this song. It's upbeat, fast-paced and a whole lot of fun. Just a bona fide classic to open this album with. The next song is certainly quite a different one, Dear Prudence. They're one that's equally as great. Instead of McCartney dominating, we have Lennon, showcasing his tender side of a heartfelt vocal performance, and a delicately played, finger-picked acoustic melody, which apparently is a pattern of which he learned from Donovan while in India, since their travels in India before the recording this album were a big inspiration, and much of the material was written on those travels and acoustically on them. And the whole song here is about the actress Mia Farrow's sister, Prudence Farrow, who was with the Beatles on their trip to India and became so enveloped in her meditation that she became completely isolated from the rest of the world. Lennon sings telling us that we should just enjoy the world, not lock ourselves away. This is also the last song, certainly for a while, without Ringo, as Paul covers both bass and drums, and the bass in particular really stands out. Such a key component to the build-up of this song towards its finale, but really it is Lennon who shines here. It's a wonderful showcase of his genius. But I would also say the McCartney-Lennon dynamic. And while this album, of course, as I've said, has tensions rise, as I said earlier, has some of the greatest highs and lows of both the band and the Lennon-McCartney relationship, and this is certainly up there with the highs. Glass Onion is another John song and one of my absolute favourites on the album. I really do love this song, and to me it has a real magical mystery tour vibe to it, certainly in its sound, its composition, just in that sort of upbeat, fun way about it. What I really like is how self-referential this song is. Lennon makes reference to Lazy Madonna, The Fool on the Hill, Strawberry Fields. Most interestingly of all, Lennon says, and here's another clue for you all, the walrus was Paul.
I told you about the walrus and me, man. You know that we're as close as can be, man. Well, here's another clue for you all.
This is honestly one of my favourite Lennon lines ever, to be honest, because I find it really interesting to do with the whole Paul is dead conspiracy, which, well, I don't believe. To those who do, the walrus being Paul is actually a key clue that Paul was killed, since I think in some culture the walrus is a harbinger of death or something like that. Check out my whole video on the Is Paul McCartney Dead on my channel if you're interested. But the conspiracy started after Sgt. Pepper, and clearly Lennon with Glass Onion is poking fun at the idea that Paul is dead, but also issuing a challenge to those who love to overanalyze the Beatles lyrics and really go into depth and say, well, go on, go try and figure this one out. It's very witty and just so Lennon. With Ringo back on drums, delivering a great performance, and it's a song with all the Beatles present and George Martin's killer string orchestrations. Everything together, the amalgamation makes this as special as it is. Obladi Oblada is a McCartney song with a clear ska influence. It's light-hearted, clearly not meant to be taken in the slightest bit seriously, and Lennon apparently just loathed this song. I think he termed it granny music shit, which I do find to be rather harsh, to be honest. This represents one of the aspects I love of the Beatles, which is just their ability to create really catchy pop songs, but also utilise kind of a collage of different sounds and instruments. This is almost like sort of a kaleidoscope of sound, with samples of dogs and people laughing, the hammered out piano intro from Lennon, well stoned out of his mind, to this sort of Sgt. Pepper, Eleanor Rigby-like storytelling of the lyrics. It's a really diverse song, and I can't help but find it kind of infectiously catchy. Unfortunately, this is followed up by Wild Honey Pie, which, let's be blunt, is absolute shit. This shows the lows that the album sometimes sinks to. This is a solo Paul experiment with multi-tracking, and luckily it's less than a minute, and it's only here because Pat Boyd, for some unknown reason, liked it. To me, this is one of the worst songs on this album, but honestly, it's one of the worst songs the Beatles ever put out under their name. The continuing story of Buffalo Bill, to me, is kind of John's Obladi Oblada. It's this self-indulgent yet enjoyable sing-along. It was written about a guy in India from America who would leave the meditation to go and kill some tigers before seeking enlightenment. Though most significantly, this song actually features Yoko Ono on lead vocals, albeit for one line, but it certainly demonstrates the increasing presence in the studio as Lennon became more and more besotted with it. I believe this is the only female vocal to appear on any recorded Beatles song, though don't quote me on it, I could be wrong there. But this line she sings really feels kind of jarring in the song, and her voice I think is maybe a little out of key. It's not great. And you can tell, again, the tension's beginning to mount as Yoko's presence becomes more overt, even leaking into the Beatles' music. No girlfriend or wife of the Beatles had ever leaked into their music so directly as Yoko on the continuing story of Buffalo Bill. The song as a whole, though, it's rather charming. It's not classic, but it's kind of nice. Really, it's just that sort of sing-along chorus, which is, it's cheesy as it gets, but yet kind of irresistible. But then again, the continuing story of Buffalo Bill is kind of blown out of the water by what comes next, and especially after the stupidity of Honey Pie, it seems possibly the album's going in a downhill direction. But oh no, George Harrison presents a drop-dead gorgeous song. This was the moment when George turned from the rather talented guitarist and occasionally decent songwriter to a genius. Since anyone who could write this is just on another level of songwriting to other mere mortals. Every element is simply sublime. This is just George striking out on his own, a show of defiance against the rest of the Beatles and a demand for the credit that really he did deserve. The Beatles was Paul and John, and George here shows that he is not to be forgotten. The lyrics in the version we have here are haunting and beautiful, yet I found some of the omitted lyrics to actually be the most interesting. And one of them is, I look at the trouble and see that it's raging, while my guitar gently weeps, as I'm sitting here doing nothing but aging, still my guitar gently weeps. If this doesn't show how George felt he was having a backseat role in the Beatles, I don't know what does. I just love that line. It's like, I'm sitting here doing nothing but aging, that Lennon and McCartney were dominating creatively, dominating everything, and he was just there in the background while his guitar gently wept. But here he truly puts himself to the foreground. Eric Clapton was of course brought in, a very rare appearance of an outsider to the Beatles and a special guest. I mean, he was uncredited of course, but his guitar solo here is just one of the greatest, and up there with the very best ever recorded. Not much more needs to be said about this masterpiece. The tone shifts now quite dramatically with Happiness is a Warm Gun, which is a very weird Lennon song. Apparently George and Paul consider this one of the best songs on the White Album. The title appears to be a euphemism and describe Lennon's relationship with Ono, and many claim that the lyrics, I need a fix cause I'm going down, also reference to John's increasing heroin addiction at the time. What really strikes me about this song though, is the sheer variety of music just across this one tiny little song. I mean, it's like Lennon has condensed a 20-minute prog epic into less than 3 minutes. It starts off with more of a serious tone as these injections of warm, fuzzy, heavily distorted guitar come in, but it soon begins to change pace and tempo with the melodies very wildly and hugely throughout the song, from the fast-paced Mother Superior fading to the commanding vocals of the Happiness is a Warm Gun segment. Paul and George singing Beach Boys backing vocals of Bang Bang Shoot Shoot, adding comic relief to the song, and I've honestly never quite had anything like it. It's so bombastic and so out there, and that's what really draws me to it. And then we get Martha My Dear, which is a very British music hall type song, as well as also kind of being, I suppose, cabaret. It's very easy on the ears, a melody-driven song with a sick piano line from Paul and horn accompaniment. It may be as safe as milk, but McCartney's songs, even when they are so kind of saccharine sweet, still have this charm, that innocence and optimism rendered in such a lovely way. But Martha My Dear is soon countered by the cynicism of Lennon's I'm So Tired. This was written by him when he was suffering insomnia, as well as describing his increasing coldness towards his wife, Cynthia Lennon. The vocal performance is really quite odd here. It's a mixed performance as the vocals vary from this sort of relaxed, chilled, tired style to this rising, aggressive part of angryish, almost shouting John. Musically super simplistic and really not very experimental compared to a lot of the other material here, but it's just one of those that always goes round in my head for days. There's also this really interesting backmasked vocal passage at the end, which some claim proves Paul's dead. I think it's meant to say, turn me on, dead man, if you play it backwards. But, you know, conspiracy theories. Next we come to Blackbird, which is certainly one of the most iconic songs on the album. The simple Paul's solo acoustic song with its recorded foot tap and ambient bird noises. It's certainly a song I always associate with the sun rising, morning, the birds chirruping, and it's easy to think that's what it's meant to be about, but it's actually far deeper. It's written in response to the 60s civil rights movement and all the great things it achieved. The lyrics, if you look at it in that context, take these broken wings and learn to fly. And it really is a beautiful song, like Blowing in the Wind by contemporary Bob Dylan. It's just describing an era, but with a sense of optimism. It's saying, look at what you've done. We get another Harrison song now. Unfortunately, it's nowhere near as good as While My Guitar Gently Weeps. This is Piggies, and it's along the same lines as kind of Yellow Submarine, as in it seems like a kid's song. Well, its lyrics actually use animals, but it's kind of in like an Animal Farm way, I think, because it seems to be a metaphor for corporate greed, I suppose. Musically, it features wonderful use of a harpsichord, which is always a really nice instrument and certainly not used too often by the Beatles. And musically, I always get this medieval vibe to it. Maybe it's just me, but I could kind of imagine Richie Blackmore playing this on his lute. Maybe I'm completely off there, but there you go. Honestly, it's not one I really care for. I just see it as a bit of filler. Ain't bad, ain't good, it's just a stopgap. Rocky Raccoon, again, the amount of tone changes on this album, it really is one of the most disjointed albums I've ever listened to, but that's kind of also what makes it so fascinating, I suppose. Rocky Raccoon certainly continues that trend. This is a pastiche of folk rock that definitely seems to spoof the scene, and I sense a little bit of Dylan spoofing going on as well. Paul's accent at the beginning is rather a crude attempt at sort of a Texas, deep South American accent. This song, it's about cowboys who attempt to steal back their gal and, well, mainly acoustic folk. It also has some very obvious dancehall elements. Again, McCartney showing his love of dancehall music, which is honestly odd, and particularly the fast-paced honky-tonky piano. It is odd. It's rather enjoyable in a jovial manner, and Lennon's harmonica certainly stands out as the best instrumental performance here. And while the story is as trope-laden and as cliche as it gets, it kind of suits Paul and the music without feeling too overly silly. It's not too bad at all, actually. Don't Pass Me By is actually Ringo Starr's first solely written song, with its origins tracing all the way back to 1964. How does it fare? How does Ringo strike on his own go? Is this another While My Guitar Gently Weeps? No, this is Ringo at the end of the day. It's based around an incredibly basic sequence of piano chords, with the star lead instrument being the violin, which really goes all out. If it wasn't for the violin, this song would be pretty bad. He's definitely going for a country attitude, which is not a surprise if you look at some of his solo stuff. Country is certainly always an influence to Ringo. The best part, I suppose, aside from the violin, is Ringo's drumming. It definitely shines here, which I suppose you would expect. And when Ringo is limited a drummer, I've definitely come to have a great appreciation of his drumming quite recently. His loose style is very distinct, but he just has this real fire to it in the way he keeps time. And it's actually quite unique and capable of some interesting moments. Aside from the drums and violin, I really don't enjoy this song, to be honest. Ringo's vocals and vocal melodies just don't do anything even slightly remarkable, and the song just feels too repetitive, too stale. I mean, you've got the diversity of songs like Lennon's Happiness is a Warm Gun, the magnificence of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, the thrill ride back in the USSR, and this just doesn't hold up. You know, with Why Don't We Do It in the Road, I wish I could tell you this has some deep message, that there is an allegory of sexual liberation or a celebration of 60s counterculture buried inside the lyrics. But no, this is McCartney genuinely telling you about two monkeys having sex in the road. Great. Thanks, Paul, because we needed a song about that. I have little love, in fact no love for this song, not just because of how blatant and obvious the lyrics are, and what I do like Paul's vocals quite a bit in it, as I like him as sort of his roughest and most raucous vocally. This is just basic 12-bar blues, and it's dull as freaking dishwater with some of the worst lyrics Paul's ever come up with. Move on. But after a couple of blips, the first part certainly knows how to end. It ends with two beautiful acoustic ballads, McCartney's I Will and Lennon's Julia. McCartney's is first up, and following one of his most crude love songs, Why Don't We Do It in the Road, this one is far, far better. It's unassuming, it's delicate, it's Blackbird-like affair, though not in the same league as that classic. Ringo's bongos provide a nice gentle percussive element, and the gentle, serene sounds of McCartney's voice make it a very pleasant, pretty song. It could have perhaps been done with developing a bit more, maybe been made a tad longer. It just feels rather short, and the problem is that the ballad that comes after it is quite a lot better, because it's Lennon's brilliant Julia. This is one of the most tender, personal songs John ever wrote. He truly was wearing his heart on his sleeve, which was quite rare for John. He wouldn't often do that, as he mournfully yet lovingly sings of his mother who died when he was growing up, and reflects on her passing with a deep yearning. Yet this song isn't just about John's past, it's also about his future, with the lyric "Ocean Child Calls Me." That is Yoko Ono's, the direct translation of her name is Ocean Child, as he speaks of his future. It's probably the most beautiful song on this record at all.
Julia, morning moon, touch me, so I sing a song of love, Julia.
So far we've had thrills and disasters, and well, this only intensifies to the next part, as we have the best song on the album and the worst. This has been TheAIbumMan. Thanks for watching. Tune into part 2 of my analysis and review of the Beatles' White Album. Long live rock and roll.